The sprawling city, aglow with neon lights and bathed in a seemingly unending rain, was a frenetic world unto itself. Its colossal buildings, like sentinels in the night, loomed overhead, while the streets below twisted and turned in a chaotic tangle of concrete and shadows. Here, amidst the hum of urban life, was Daniel, a solitary figure navigating the rain-soaked labyrinth. Daniel, a 35-year-old man burdened by the relentless grind of his corporate job, seemed almost nondescript amidst the urban chaos. His dark hair hung damp and unkempt, clinging to his forehead, while his weary eyes scanned the environment, a cocktail of exhaustion and longing painting his features. His coat, once a dignified shade of charcoal, clung to him, heavy with rainwater, as he trudged through the dimly lit alleys seeking solace. Each step echoed through the narrow confines, blending with the staccato rhythm of raindrops hitting the pavement. It was in this symphony of urban solitude that he stumbled upon an unexpected oasis. At the end of the winding alley, a neon sign flickered intermittently, its light weak but strangely inviting amidst the downpour. It buzzed erratically, like a dying firefly, yet there was something magnetic about it that drew Daniel closer. The Stranger's Haven read the worn, almost forgotten sign that hung precariously above the entrance to a decrepit bar. The establishment bore the marks of time, its wooden facade peeling and the glass windows fogged with years of neglect. It looked as though it had been untouched for decades, a relic from another era juxtaposed against the modernity of the city. Yet, in that moment, it promised Daniel something he couldn't quite articulate: a refuge, not just from the rain, but from the stifling predictability of his existence. Compelled by an inexplicable curiosity, Daniel approached the seemingly abandoned haven, his footsteps tentative yet eager, like those of a weary traveler stumbling upon an unexpected sanctuary. As Daniel pushed open the heavy, time-worn door, a wave of warmth and subdued murmurs welcomed him, a stark contrast to the cold isolation of the rain-drenched streets outside. The door groaned on its hinges, as though unused to visitors, before closing behind him with a muffled thud. Instantly, the relentless rain became a distant symphony, its sounds dampened by the bar's thick, aged walls. The interior of the bar was an unexpected sight. It was surprisingly well kept, though it bore the undeniable imprint of a bygone era. The air was heavy with the scent of aged wood, polished to a dull sheen, and the faint, lingering aroma of tobacco and liquor. The lighting was dim, emanating from vintage lamps that cast a warm amber glow, throwing long, dancing shadows on the walls adorned with faded posters and memorabilia. Daniel, a man predisposed to solitude and introspection, found the atmosphere strangely comforting. He moved through the space, his footsteps muffled by the worn, yet meticulously clean carpet that stretched across the floor. Settling into a creaky stool at the bar, he took off his wet coat, relishing the sudden lightness. The stool groaned beneath him, echoing the time-worn but enduring character of the place. He ordered a whiskey, his voice slicing through the low hum of conversations around him. The bartender, an elderly man with a grizzled beard that spoke of many stories untold, responded promptly. With hands weathered by time but steady nonetheless, he poured a generous measure of amber liquid into a glass that had seen better days. The old bartender's eyes met Daniel's as he slid the glass across the counter. There was a knowing smile etched into the lines of his face, as if he understood, without words, the refuge that Daniel sought in this unlikely haven. The tacit understanding felt oddly comforting to Daniel, who was more accustomed to the indifference of the city's bustling crowds. Daniel took a moment to scan his surroundings more thoroughly. The bar, despite its initial appearance of being outdated, seemed to possess a timeless quality. The walls, lined with dark wood paneling, absorbed the muted conversations and occasional laughter that punctuated the room. A jukebox stood in one corner, its chrome surface gleaming faintly in the dim light, while the pool table, covered in faded green felt, bore witness to countless games and friendly rivalries. As he sipped his whiskey, feeling the liquid warmth spread through him, Daniel's gaze drifted across the assorted patrons. The place was sparsely populated, and each individual seemed absorbed in their own world, much like Daniel himself. In this moment, amidst the anachronistic charm of the stranger's haven, Daniel felt an odd sense of belonging. As the hands of the clock on the wall moved inexorably forward, the atmosphere within the stranger's haven began to shift subtly. The night outside matured, and with it came a parade of patrons, each more peculiar and anachronistic than the last. The bar, once a sanctuary of solitude and quietude, now transformed into a curious stage for a series of enigmatic entrants. The door creaked open to admit the first of these characters, an elegant woman who seemed to have stepped straight out of a Jazz-age painting. She was adorned in a 1920s flapper dress, the beads and fringes of her gown shimmering and swaying gracefully with every step. Her hair was styled into a perfect bob, and her eyes, lined with kohl, scanned the room with an air of detached amusement. Pearls draped around her neck, and her gloved hands clutched a delicate, feathered fan. Every detail about her, from the way she moved to the soft tinkle of her laughter, seemed to belong to a different era altogether. Shortly after, the door swung open again, this time to reveal a sailor whose visage told tales of distant shores and turbulent seas. His attire was worn and weathered, with tattoos adorning his muscular arms. Intricate designs of anchors, ships, and mythical creatures, all reminiscent of long-forgotten ports and adventures on the high seas. His face was rugged, tanned by the sun and salt, and his eyes held a distant, contemplative look as if perpetually seeking the horizon. The peculiar tableau was further enriched by the entrance of a jazz musician, who ambled in cradling a forlorn trumpet in his hands. His suit, though impeccably tailored, bore the faded grandeur of a bygone era of smoky jazz clubs and soulful melodies. His fingers, long and nimble, danced restlessly over the brass instrument, and his eyes, deep and melancholy, spoke of countless melodies echoing in his soul. Each new patron seemed oddly out of place, as if they were figures ripped from different pages of history and thrust together within the dim confines of this obscure bar. Their presence, incongruent and yet harmonious, lent an eerie, surreal atmosphere to the stranger's haven. Outside, the rain had transformed into a tempest, as if nature itself sought to drown the sprawling city in its sorrow. The droplets hammered against the windows with relentless ferocity, streaking down the glass in rivulets that distorted the neon lights outside. The cacophony of the rain seemed to create a barrier between the bar and the rest of the world, rendering the space within even more isolated and timeless. Daniel observed these peculiar entrants with a mix of fascination and incredulity. He felt like a spectator privy to a strange, unfolding play, each character contributing to an inexplicable narrative that danced just out of reach of understanding. His senses heightened. He continued to nurse his whiskey, the amber liquid now a mere backdrop to the extraordinary spectacle unfolding before him. The quiet murmur of conversations and the soft clinking of glasses momentarily faded into the background, as Daniel's attention was wholly captured by the next set of entrants. The door gave its characteristic creak, but this time, what lay beyond was not merely peculiar, it was deeply personal. The first to step in was a man in his 60s, with a posture that once boasted of authority, but now slightly stooped with age. He had a familiar salt and pepper beard, and laugh lines etched deeply into his face, a face that Daniel had seen age through years of wisdom and experience. It was unmistakably his father, yet he was garbed in an outfit from the 1960s, complete with a vintage hat and polished leather shoes that clicked rhythmically against the wooden floor. Following closely was a woman, graceful and radiant. Her elegant dress, reminiscent of the 1970s, flowed with every step, showing off her slender frame. Her auburn hair cascaded down her back in loose waves, and her eyes, alight with a familiar warmth and tenderness, searched the room. It was the face of Daniel's mother in her youthful years, a face he had only seen in old family photos. Behind them was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, with a mischievous glint in his eyes. Dressed in a leather jacket and jeans typical of the 1980s rock era, he radiated a rebellious charm. The unmistakable similarities in their features immediately told Daniel that this was his younger brother, James. the same James who had shared countless adventures and misadventures with him during their formative years. Next, a woman with striking blonde hair entered, her attire echoing the fashion of the 1990s. It was Anna, his older sister, the same playful smirk, the same twinkle in her eyes, but younger, more vivacious. The sight of her in this setting, in that particular era's attire, made Daniel's head reel. Lastly, the door yielded a sight that made Daniel's heart constrict. A woman, elegant and beautiful, with cascading raven black hair and eyes deep enough to lose oneself in. It was Sarah, his estranged wife, but she was not in the attire of their recent past, but rather in a vintage dress from the 1950s, complete with pearls and lace gloves. Each figure, though unmistakably recognizable, seemed detached, as if enveloped in a dreamlike haze. They chatted, laughed, and engaged with the other patrons, but seemed entirely unaware of the oddity of their presence, their attire, or the profound impact they were having on Daniel. It felt like they were actors in a play of which only Daniel was an unwilling audience. The weight of recognition, mixed with the eerie atmosphere, bore down on him, making the room feel constricting, the walls seeming to close in as he grappled with the reality unraveling before him. Daniel's initial shock gave way to a perplexing curiosity. Tentatively, he approached these uncanny replicas of his family, engaging them in conversations that he hoped would shed light on the surreal situation unfolding around him. He first approached the man resembling his father. With a friendly gesture, he offered to buy him a drink. The man accepted with a warm smile, and as they clinked glasses, he began speaking in a manner that seemed foreign to Daniel. His words were interspersed with outdated slang, phrases from a bygone era that felt oddly disjointed from the man Daniel knew as his father. As the conversation progressed, Daniel realized that the memories this man shared were skewed, diverging significantly from his own recollections. He spoke of joyful celebrations and heartbreaking losses, but these events were unfamiliar, painted with details that seemed to belong to another lifetime altogether. There was an earnestness in the way he recounted them, his eyes reflecting the genuine emotions tied to those memories. Next, Daniel moved to his mother's double. Her laughter was melodic, and her eyes crinkled with a familiar warmth as she spoke. Yet the stories she shared were peppered with moments that felt alien to Daniel. Joyous family vacations that he never took, tragic losses that he never experienced. Her words painted a tapestry of a life similar yet distinctly different from his own. The same unsettling discrepancies echoed in his conversations with the versions of his brother, sister, and Sarah. Each harbored memories rich in detail, but foreign to him, like echoes from parallel worlds. Their slang, their mannerisms, and their experiences were like distorted reflections of reality. With each interaction, the atmosphere within the bar seemed to shift and contort, responding to the myriad emotions that danced through the conversations. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly, as if alive with the stories being told within them. Laughter echoed with an eerie resonance, while the soft sobs seemed to linger, creating a symphony of joy and sorrow that was both haunting and mesmerizing. Daniel felt an unsettling sensation, as if he were an intruder in a world that was familiar, yet not his own. He moved through the conversations like a ghost, witnessing snapshots of lives that paralleled his own, but were tinged with experiences and emotions that he couldn't quite grasp. The bar, with its flickering lights and shifting shadows, seemed to be a stage for these spirits to enact their stories, creating a space where dimensions collided and timelines intertwined. With each revelation, Daniel's sense of disorientation grew. The faces were familiar, the emotions real, yet everything seemed slightly askew, like a painting that was just a shade off from reality. The realization that he was caught in a tapestry of intertwining fates, within walls that echoed with both laughter and sobs, sent a shiver down his spine. A sense of foreboding wrapped around Daniel like a cold shroud as he tried to comprehend the bizarre scene unfolding before him. He felt the urgent need to escape, to free himself from the surreal grip that this strange bar seemed to hold over him. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood up abruptly, his stool scraping loudly against the worn wooden floor. He made his way towards the exit, eager to put distance between himself and the unsettling encounters he had experienced. Yet as he reached for the door, the storm outside unleashed its fury with renewed vigor. The wind howled like a tortured beast, and rain lashed against the windows with such intensity that it seemed as if the heavens themselves were trying to keep him inside. The door rattled violently in its frame as he tried to push against it, but the tempest was unrelenting. Reluctantly, Daniel realized that he was trapped within the confines of the bar, at least until the storm subsided. As he resigned himself to waiting out the storm, the patrons of the bar, those eerie echoes of people he knew, began to share more sinister and sorrowful tales. These were stories that seemed to be dredged up from the darkest corners of their existences, of lives that were violently cut short, dreams that were cruelly snuffed out, and fates that were twisted and tragic. The elegant woman in the flapper dress spoke of a love lost in a tragic accident, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The sailor recounted tales of treacherous seas and comrades swallowed by the depths, his voice a low, mournful rumble. The jazz musician spoke softly of opportunities missed and melodies that would never be heard, his fingers caressing the trumpet with a heartbreaking tenderness. The bar seemed to transform with each story, taking on an ethereal, almost spectral quality. It was as if the space existed in a temporal limbo, a haven for lost souls caught between worlds, each seeking solace or redemption in their shared tales of woe. As Daniel listened, he found fragments of his own troubled past being mirrored back to him. The sailor's tales of loss echoed the estrangement he felt from his family. The musician's unplayed melodies resonated with his own unfulfilled dreams and aspirations. And in the flapper's tale of love lost, he saw reflections of his fractured relationship with Sarah. The stories stirred something within him, unearthing memories and emotions that he had long buried. The bar, with its dim lighting and shadowed corners, seemed to peel back layers of his own psyche, forcing him to confront his own ghosts and regrets. Daniel felt a strange connection to these apparitions, an understanding that transcended the boundaries of time and space. The air grew heavy with shared sorrow and empathy, as if the walls themselves absorbed the pain and longing that flowed through the room. The bar seemed to exist outside of time, a purgatory where these lost souls, and perhaps even Daniel himself, were seeking something intangible, forgiveness, closure, or perhaps just a chance to be heard. With each story, the boundary between the spectral patrons and Daniel seemed to blur, and he found himself drawn into their tales, experiencing their grief and longing as if it were his own. The room pulsed with an energy that was both haunting and strangely comforting, creating a space where the living and the dead, the past and the present, coexisted in a fragile harmony. The jazz musician, a tall man with an aura of melancholy about him, rose slowly from his seat. The dim light caught the curves of his trumpet, making it gleam like burnished gold. He brought the instrument to his lips and began to play a haunting melody, one that seemed to reverberate through the very fabric of the room. The notes were soft and mournful, winding their way through the air like tendrils of smoke. As the melody unfurled, the atmosphere in the bar began to change. The shadows cast by the flickering lights seemed to dance and sway to the music, and the air grew thick with an unspoken sadness. The walls of the bar seemed to absorb the sound, and images began to materialize upon them like ghostly projections. These images told a tragic story, unveiling the secret that the stranger's haven had kept hidden for so many years. The images depicted a time long past, where the bar was lively and bustling with patrons. Laughter and chatter filled the air, and the clinking of glasses created a symphony of joyous celebration. But then the scene shifted abruptly. Flames appeared, engulfing the bar in a raging inferno. The images showcased the chaos and panic that ensued, the desperate attempts to escape, and the heart-wrenching realization that not everyone would make it out alive. The images flickered and danced, and it became clear to Daniel that the patrons he had been interacting with that night were echoes of those who had perished in that devastating fire so long ago. The elegant flapper, the sailor, the jazz musician, all were spirits, forever bound to this place by their untimely demise. As Daniel watched the spectral reenactment, a chilling realization washed over him. His own past, too, was marred by a tragic fire. The figures resembling his family, his parents, his younger brother, his sister, and his estranged wife, Sarah, were chilling reminders of his own loss. His family had perished in a fire that had consumed their home, a tragedy that had left him grappling with memories laced with guilt and questions with no answers. The haunting melody continued to weave through the room, unearthing long-suppressed emotions within Daniel. His heart ached with a profound sense of loss, and he felt a connection with the spirits around him. The guilt that had been his constant companion since the fire that took his family seemed to resonate with the unfulfilled dreams and untimely ends of the bar's patrons. The room was silent, except for the mournful notes of the trumpet, each note echoing with the pain of lost opportunities and lives cut short. The haunting tune seemed to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, between the past and the present. Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of empathy for these lost souls, understanding that they, like him, were trapped in a limbo of pain and regret. As the melody reached its crescendo, the images on the walls became more vivid and intense, encapsulating the raw emotion that permeated the room. Daniel could almost feel the heat of the flames, the fear and desperation of those trying to escape, and the profound sadness that lingered in the aftermath. The revelation of the bar's tragic past and the eerie parallels with his own life left Daniel feeling as though he had stepped into a space where the boundaries between reality and the supernatural had blurred. The haunting strains of the trumpet seemed to lay bare the souls of those present, both living and dead, creating a poignant tapestry of shared grief and eternal longing. As the mournful melody faded, the atmosphere within the stranger's haven shifted once more. The room seemed to darken, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive energy. From the shadows at the back of the bar, a figure emerged, slowly making its way toward Daniel. The figure was dressed immaculately in a suit of the darkest black, with a tie that seemed to absorb the dim light around it. His face was obscured by the brim of a fedora hat, casting his features into an inscrutable mask of shadow. As he approached, the room seemed to bend and warp around him, as though reality itself was reluctant to touch him. This mysterious figure exuded an aura of timeless authority and eerie calmness. He addressed himself as the proprietor, and spoke with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of an abyss, resonating with an otherworldly timbre that sent shivers down Daniel's spine. The proprietor, with an air of benign magnanimity, offered Daniel a proposition that seemed too alluring to resist. With a wave of his hand, he painted a vivid picture of an alternate reality where the tragic fire that had claimed the lives of Daniel's family had never occurred. He spoke of a world where laughter and love filled Daniel's life, where the pain of loss was replaced by the joy of togetherness. In this reality, Daniel's family were alive and happy, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that had befallen them in another timeline. All of this could be Daniel's, the proprietor whispered seductively, in exchange for a seemingly small price, his soul. The promise of altering his tormented past and rewriting the fates of those he loved was tantalizing. For a moment, the allure of this proposition clouded Daniel's judgment, and he found himself on the brink of accepting the dark bargain. However, just as he was about to concede, the spirits of the bar intervened. The elegant flapper, the sailor, the jazz musician, and the figures of his own family materialized around him, their expressions etched with a mix of sorrow and urgency. They revealed to Daniel the true nature of the proprietor, a malevolent entity that thrived on despair and fed on the souls of those ensnared by tragedy. These spirits, bound to the limbo of the stranger's haven, had once been tempted by similar offers, and now they sought to protect Daniel from a similar fate. They recounted tales of how the proprietor preyed upon their darkest moments, offering false hope and leading them further into a cycle of perpetual torment. The spirits implored Daniel to see beyond the enticing illusion presented by the proprietor. They spoke of the importance of facing one's past, no matter how painful, and of finding solace and redemption not through dark bargains but through acceptance and healing. Their voices, a chorus of warnings and heartfelt pleas, echoed around the room, creating a resonant counterpoint to the sinister promises of the proprietor. The revelations laid bare the sinister machinations at play, and Daniel felt a surge of clarity and resolve. In that moment, the bar seemed to pulse with an energy that was both somber and hopeful, as if the spirits themselves were channeling their collective strength and urging Daniel to make the right choice. The room was charged with an ethereal light, and the shadows cast by the proprietor seemed to recoil and retreat before it. The atmosphere inside the stranger's haven reached a fevered pitch as Daniel, fortified by the revelations and the support of the spirits around him, stood resolutely against the proprietor. The room seemed to quiver and pulsate, as if the very fabric of the space was resonating with the intensity of the confrontation unfolding within its walls. The spirits, once echoes of their former selves, now emanated a luminous aura, their spectral forms taking on a solidity and vibrancy that seemed to defy the desolation of their surroundings. The elegant flapper, her eyes now alight with a fierce determination, stood shoulder to shoulder with the rugged sailor, whose tattoos seemed to glow with an ethereal light. The jazz musician, his trumpet poised, let out a hauntingly beautiful melody that filled the room with a sound that was at once melancholic and triumphant. Together they formed a phalanx around Daniel, their energies converging and intertwining to create a protective barrier against the malevolent entity before them. The air crackled with electricity, and the walls of the bar seemed to groan and shudder, as if protesting against the forces being unleashed within. Daniel, his heart pounding and his resolve unwavering, stepped forward and faced the proprietor. His voice, though tinged with fear, held a resolute firmness as he rejected the dark bargain and demanded the release of the spirits trapped in this limbo. The spirits echoed his sentiments, their voices joining in a chorus of defiance that reverberated through the decaying bar. The proprietor, taken aback by this unexpected resistance, recoiled. His facade of suave assurance flickered, revealing a momentary glimpse of rage and frustration. The shadows around him writhed and twisted, as if mirroring his inner turmoil. The room itself seemed to sway, caught in the tumultuous battle of wills unfolding within its confines. In a climactic surge of energy, Daniel and the spirits channeled their collective desire for freedom and redemption. The room was bathed in a radiant light, emanating from the spirits and converging upon the proprietor. The malevolent figure let out a guttural roar, his form disintegrating before the onslaught of light and resolve. As the proprietor was banished, the illusion that had shrouded the stranger's haven shattered like glass. The bar, once a refuge for lost souls, now stood revealed in its true form, a burnt, decaying husk, a grim testament to the tragedy that had unfolded years ago. The walls, charred and crumbling, seemed to sigh with relief as the oppressive presence was expelled from their midst. The spirits, now freed from the cycle of sorrow and despair that had bound them to this place, began to dissipate. One by one, they nodded at Daniel, their expressions conveying gratitude and a sense of peace. The flapper's eyes twinkled with a mischievous joy, the sailor saluted with a grin, and the jazz musician played a final, uplifting note on his trumpet that seemed to linger in the air even after his form had vanished. The bar continued to crumble around Daniel, the reality of the burnt structure asserting itself as the spirits were released from their eternal haunt. The walls, once resonant with the echoes of laughter and sorrow, now groaned and creaked as they gave way to the passage of time. In those final moments, amidst the collapsing remnants of the stranger's haven, Daniel stood amidst the wreckage, his heart lightened and his spirit fortified by the knowledge that he had played a part in breaking a cycle of torment and bringing solace to the souls that had been ensnared in this spectral snare. As the first rays of dawn began to tentatively paint the city in hues of soft gold and pale blue, Daniel stirred from his slumber, his eyes fluttering open to reveal the world around him in a new, surreal light. The rain had ceased its relentless assault on the streets, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening, a canvas refreshed and ready to be painted anew. He found himself lying on the damp ground, the cold seeping through his clothes, a stark contrast to the warmth that filled him. Before him lay the skeletal remains of the stranger's haven, a grim carcass of charred timbers and crumbling brick that bore silent testimony to the Inferno that had once raged there. The neon sign, which had beckoned him so compellingly before, now lay shattered and lifeless amidst the debris. Daniel rose shakily to his feet, his limbs stiff and aching, but his heart pulsating with a mixture of emotions. The city around him seemed at once familiar and foreign, a stage upon which he had just played out a surreal drama that defied explanation. The towering buildings loomed above him like silent sentinels, their indifferent facades betraying no hint of the uncanny events that had transpired in the hidden crevices of the night. The revelation that he had, in fact, been in the company of spirits, echoes of lives long extinguished, weighed heavily upon him. The faces of the patrons, the spectral simulacra of his family, and the haunting melodies of the jazz musician replayed in his mind like a film reel, each frame etched with poignant clarity. Yet, amidst the haunting memories, Daniel felt an unexpected liberation, as if the spectral encounter had offered him a chance at redemption and closure. His own demons, intertwined with the guilt and sorrow over his family's tragic demise, seemed to have been exorcised, at least in part, by the night's ordeal. His steps, though heavy with exhaustion, carried a newfound determination as he walked away from the ruins. The city around him, still slumbering in the aftermath of the storm, seemed untouched by the spectral drama that had unfolded in its hidden corners. The alleys and streets lay quiet and deserted, the echoes of footsteps and laughter from another era lingering like a haunting melody. As Daniel navigated the labyrinthine streets, the spectral bar and its ghostly patrons seemed to recede into the realm of dreams, their presence fading like the dissipating mists of the night. Yet the experience had left an indelible mark on him, a chilling reminder of the thin veil that separated the world of the living from the realm of the supernatural. His heart, once burdened by the shackles of his past, now bore a strange amalgamation of sorrow and solace. The haunting echoes of the stranger's haven would remain with him, a spectral whisper urging him to cherish the transient nature of life and to seek redemption in the living world that lay before him. Haunted yet liberated, with a newfound appreciation for the fragility and preciousness of existence, Daniel continued his solitary journey through the awakening city. The first rays of the sun, breaking through the remnants of the storm, cast long shadows on the wet pavement, as if reaching out to him, inviting him to step into a new day and a new beginning.